Clobberin Time.
I want to start with a fight that some people say is hurting the integrity of the sport. To be honest, Curran, I'm going to be very flat out. I don't give a Anderson Silva versus Jake Paul is happening this week on October 29th in Phoenix. I want to be honest. I love this fight because of the unpredictability of it all. I have no idea who's going to win. Anderson Silva is old enough to be Jake Paul's father, but he's the most decorated striker in UFC history. Jake Paul is a social media maven, a YouTube superstar, and has made a good account for himself in the boxing ring. First things first, what do you think of this matchup?
I'm pumped for this matchup, Jake Paul versus Anderson Silva, and I'll tell you why. I think it's a really interesting fight. We talked about, you touched upon the age difference there. Anderson Silva turned pro in boxing in 1998. Jake Paul was born in 1997. Anderson Silva has literally been doing this since Jake Paul was in diapers. And I actually think that makes it more intriguing, more interesting, because Anderson Silva is the ultimate combat sports competitor. He loves this sport. He has a passion for it. That's why he's still doing this at 47 years old. He mentioned, hey, I got 5 kids, I got to feed, I got grandkids. Yeah, that's true, but he has a passion for this sport. He does it because he loves it. And in terms of Jake Paul, I actually think Jake Paul, what he's doing for the sport of boxing is great. He's bringing in a lot of different eyeballs from a lot of different places. And I've said for a long time, if you're an influencer or a YouTuber or whatever, you have to work to create that audience. That audience just doesn't come overnight. That's hours grinding to make that audience. And now, if you're going to take that well-established audience and bring them into combat sports, I think that's a tremendous thing. So I'm actually really looking forward to this matchup. I think it's very interesting.
So a lot of people have said that Anderson Silva is taking this fight for the money, right? The naysayers. But I say to those people, it's like, you must not watch Anderson Silva fight. What Anderson Silva has done from his MMA career to now is nothing but break records and be competitive. He's never completely been out of a fight. More importantly, Jake Paul's, the record of his opponents before they stepped into a boxing ring with him, 0-0 as a pro. Anderson Silva beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who is a former WBC middleweight champion. I can't imagine that Anderson Silva is stepping in the ring just for the money. Yes, it's a great payday, but I think this is an intriguing fight in more ways than one. What do you say to those people that say that Anderson Silva is just trying to cash out on this fight?
What I say to those people is, do you go to work for free? I don't think so. So I think there's nothing wrong with getting a paycheck. At the same time, Anderson Silva is doing what he loves, right? That's why he's still going at 47 years old. I don't think he has financial problems. I think he loves the sport. And if you can get paid doing something you love, why would you not do that? I don't think in any other walk of life would someone look at someone doing something they love to make money and say that's a negative thing. So I don't think that's a negative thing here. And at the same time, in terms of this matchup, I mean, Jake Paul, the one thing you mentioned his opponent's records in the past. The one thing that's very different here is there's mutual respect, and nothing you can say can get under the skin of Anderson Silva. You can't do that. He just loves this sport too much. He's too much of a positive person, and that's not going to happen. And all the pressure in the world is on Jake Paul on October 29th. Anderson Silva, his legacy is cemented. It doesn't matter what happens in this fight. We already know he's one of the greatest MMA fighters of all time. Jake Paul, he has a lot of smack talk to back up. So his career could be derailed in a big way if he has a poor showing against Anderson Silva. I think it's a fascinating matchup, and I'm looking forward to it.
You know, there's one thing I'll disagree with you. I think it's okay if Jake Paul loses this fight. Because if he loses to the most decorated striker in MMA history, and he's Jake Paul, he defies the science of boxing where undefeated records matter. I think if he loses, it's okay. And if he loses a close fight, it just leads to a bigger rematch between these two fighters. Because I don't necessarily know exactly where Jake Paul goes after this fight. If he were to just kind of knock out Anderson Silva, you can go to a Nate Diaz fight, of course. You could maybe revisit the Tommy Fury fight. You could travel overseas and fight KSI. But the thing about those 3 fights is they'll always be there. I think if he's in there with a competitive opponent in Anderson Silva, which I think this fight is going to be very competitive, I think if he loses a close fight, he may gain more respect. If there's one thing we know about Anderson Silva from his UFC career and his career in Pride as an MMA fighter, he's always wanted to be a boxer. He's always had the tools to make him look like he could have been a great boxer. Once upon a time, Anderson Silva and Roy Jones Jr. were rumored to have a boxing match that never came to fruition. Why? Because Anderson Silva loves boxing. So if he were to beat Jake Paul, I think for about 3 or 4 days, the naysayers would be like, Jake Paul's terrible. But if they book that rematch, we'll be tuning in. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. I think if Anderson Silva wins the first fight, I think there's definitely going to be an immediate rematch, and I think there's going to be even more eyeballs on that rematch. Either way, Jake Paul, I don't think his boxing career would be over if he lost. I do think, though, that shine and that ego and that bravado, that would change a little bit, right? We've seen that in the past. We saw that with Conor McGregor when he took on Nate Diaz the first time and got stopped. It just changes a little bit, because everything before was, I'm knocking everyone out, I'm undefeated, and now it's like, wait a minute, you have that L on your record. Now, I don't think that L on your record is a bad thing, right? I think we need to get away from you have to be undefeated and therefore don't take chances. I think fighters that dare to be great and take on the best possible competition and they get an L, but then they maybe avenge it in the rematch or the trilogy or whatever, I think that's the best thing for boxing. And in terms of Jake Paul's future opponents, I mean, I think everyone is calling him out. I mean, I think he's like in UFC, you see everyone calling out Conor McGregor. I see everyone calling out Jake Paul in boxing. We mentioned Tommy Fury. If they can make that work, I think that would be a significantly interesting fight, even more so now. Hasim Rahman Jr., if they can figure out the weight, I still think that would be interesting. I even think Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., because he's the same size as Jake Paul. He's a young man, the same age or similar age, right? Not like the way that Anderson Silva is 22 years older. So I think that could be interesting if Chavez Jr. can get himself together. And then there's all these different matchups in terms of different people from different walks of life. When I interviewed Jake Paul, he mentioned Mike Tyson, right? I mean, people would tune in for these things. So I think Jake Paul is going to have a lot of options after this fight. But if he loses, I do think that cloak of just being this undefeated brash guy will change a little bit. But that could be a good thing, because that means it's time to put the nose to the grindstone, get back into the gym, train, and come back stronger than ever.
Yeah, and I think it alleviates some pressure too. Like once that O goes for a lot of guys, they aren't restricted to trying to protect that zero. Keith Thurman is a tremendous fighter, but the one thing I loved about Keith Thurman is I have an O and I'm not afraid to let it go. And if you lose, so what? Look, Conor McGregor lost. I've seen Conor McGregor get beat up. I've seen him get choked out, and he still remains the biggest draw in MMA. It's personality based, and I think Jake Paul at least has that. Let's get to the nuts and bolts of this fight. How do you see this thing going?
Yeah, it's a great question. And let me just add on real quick to what you said. Muhammad Ali has 5 losses. Manny Pacquiao has losses. Sugar Ray Robinson has losses. Some of the greatest fighters of all time have losses. Nothing wrong with that. It doesn't make them any less great. It just means that they took chances when they needed to. And I think that's a great thing for this sport. In terms of the nuts and bolts of this fight, I am going to pick Anderson Silva, maybe by like a split decision. I think he's going to outbox Jake Paul. And I think Jake Paul, in previous fights, he's had that right hand to maybe, erase what happened beforehand and have a highlight reel knockout that's come in handy. And he deserves credit for making that right hand happen in a short period of time, right? If you look at videos of Jake Paul from 3 or 4 years ago, he doesn't look like the fighter he is now. So he gets credit for having that power, for developing that, for training hard to get that. And it has helped him in the past. I think Anderson Silva's chin is just unshakable. You're not going to get to this guy. You're not going to knock this guy out. I don't see it being a highlight reel type of knockout for Jake Paul at all. And I think Anderson Silva, like we said, has been doing this since Jake Paul was in diapers. He's got that experience. He knows how to box. He knows how to move. He outboxed a younger Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. So I'm going to pick the legend in Anderson Silva to outbox Jake Paul, but I still think Jake Paul's stock will go up. In what you said, we're going to see him now go the full distance, box, move. I think it's a good fight for all involved.
Yeah, Curran, I actually agree with you 100%. This is my prediction as well. Anderson Silva by split decision. I think what we tend to forget is yes, Jake Paul is big, but Anderson Silva is not a little guy. He didn't campaign at welterweight like Ben Askren or Tyron Woodley did. He's not even though Nate Robinson was kind of big, but he wasn't a fighter, right? So, and Anissa Gibb was a YouTuber who took that knockout, and now he's completely changed his life and his career as a fighter. Anderson Silva is just wired differently. I don't think Jake Paul is going to be able to get to Anderson Silva's chin in the way that he did with Ben Askren and Tyron Woodley. Anderson Silva is a boxer first. The footwork, the high guard. I think he's going to do a lot of things to frustrate Jake Paul, especially with the hand movement. The way Silva places his punches, it's not predictable. He's a different breed of fighter. And I think it'll lead to a lot of close rounds. Jake can try to use his size, but I think Silva's just a little bit too slick. I think Jake will have his moments, but I think Anderson Silva is going to win a split decision, and it's going to be one of those losses that if Jake takes it with humility and basically says, I got a lot to learn, it's okay, I'll be back, Silva's going to hug him, kiss him, and say, let's get this bag of money. Let's do it again Super Bowl weekend. Do it in Vegas. I still don't know why they're doing this in Phoenix, but whatever. Do it in Vegas, make it big, and make it happen. But I think Anderson Silva might be just a little bit too much for Jake Paul, even at 47 years old.